almost 30 years ago, I was running around the lanes of Shropshire in a gorgeous Mark II RS 2000, DWD 962T if you own it still, and happened to spot in a garage up the road a 205 GTI and bought that, and it was a revelation. Just infinitely better as a road car than the RS 2000 was. You could go through corners faster without going sideways. Unfortunately, 10 years later, we then had to sell it because we just didn't have space to keep it anymore. We got no money for it, despite it being immaculate. At those times, I think they were going for about £1,500, and we probably made £2,500 on that car. We knew at the time it was the wrong decision, but without somewhere to keep it, we couldn't. Anyway, roll on, 20 years later, and Ludo has brought us his 205. He bought it from auction, I think. It's got 46,000 miles on the clock. And Ludo's instruction to us was put in a navigation desk so I can do the Land's End to John O'Groats. Now, putting in the nav desk was quite a nice task. Very much enjoyed it, and I'm very pleased with what we've done. But then started the real work. This might only have 46,000 miles on the clock, but it hasn't been maintained for 20 years. And so we had a whole heap of work just trying to get it back, and not least of all, recovering the dreadful things that the bodywork business that clearly sold this car had done to it in making it look pretty, but removing functionality from it quite deliberately and appallingly. So we are now waiting for Ludo to turn up in the next couple of hours. It's Wednesday, and then he's heading down to Land's End to start the Land's End to John O'Groats rally. So let me take you around the car and show you what we've done. Okay, so underneath, we've done very little, to be honest, on instruction of Ludo. This was interesting because those wretched bodywork people had taken the engine out. They put the radiator back in without these rubber insulators on the bottom mount. So in other words, that would have been direct transmission of all the shocks straight through to the aluminium radiator, rather than being padded up by these rubber pads here. So we fitted those. Here you can see just how vulnerable this sump is, and Ludo chose not to have a sump guard when asked. When it comes back in, when we've got a bit more time, I think we really have to insist on having a sump guard here, because that's quite frightening. Moving aft, the linkage was horrible. Now, most of the play was this little knuckle joint that's on the cross member here. That's where most of the play was, but we took the opportunity at the same time just to replace every one of the link rods. Okay, moving aft, we also replaced this rod as well, so now we've got a nice precise gear shift, whereas previously we actually struggled to find first and second gear at all, whether hot or cold. I have to say, second gear is still a little bit recalcitrant, but that's until the gearbox warms up, and I suspect that's an issue, standard issue with the 205. Something else the eagle-eyed will have spotted is that we have no anti-roll bar. This is the Land's End to John O'Groats rally he's on, and then next he's on the winter trial. And so therefore we want full pliancy at the front end and very much independent suspension, because it's going to be probably snowy, definitely wet, probably muddy, and we'll have rough sections. So therefore we delete the anti-roll bar entirely. If he finds himself on a dry sealed surface event, then he's going to need to reinstate that anti-roll bar. But to be honest, most of our rallying isn't done in such conditions. Okay, that's everything here. Moving aft, there's only one vertical plane on the exhaust system, and that's at this box here, so just a lightweight skid to try and stop that from catching. at Swinnerton or wherever else they might find themselves competing. And then moving aft, further still, moving aft and looking forward. Okay, the rear shock absorbers were horrible, so we put on Bilstein B4s. Typically with hatchbacks of this era, the rear suspension's pretty hard because it expects to find a load of weight being carried in the boot. But that just isn't necessary on a competition car where we're carrying very little weight in the back. So we've tried to soften it up as much as possible, so we've gone for B4s. We'll see how Ludo gets on with that and decide whether to go for B6s or not. We then later managed to burst the brake pipe, which had some hidden corrosion up here. So we've got new brake pipe and new rear hoses. Sadly, on this side, none of our suppliers can tell us what hose this is. They're all very surprised by the fact that it's a short male at one end and a female at the other. All their books say female, female. Now this is correct for the phase 1 GTI. We're just going to have to work on that when the car comes back. And the last thing I did was this rubber. It was trying to escape aft to drop the rear silencer. So we've just tack welded on a washer to make sure that he doesn't lose the exhaust mount. And that's it for underneath the car. Let's tootle out and have a look on the top sides. Okay, on the right hand side of the car, very little has changed. We've mounted the handheld fire extinguisher underneath the driver, whereas traditionally we've always put it underneath the navigator. But to be honest, the navigator needs more space behind his legs for his nav kit than the driver does. The driver doesn't need the space behind the legs. So we've given the driver this, and the navigator can still reach it whilst harnessed in to the car, which is what the road rally regs require. Then we've used an original equipment switch to power his auxiliary lamps here. Looking over further across, the navigator. This is an adjustable footrest here. Just uses a pair of Allen keys and then you can slide it fore or aft to suit your navigator. Ludo spec'd the pair of large clocks here. Voltage meter for us to keep an eye on the fact that the car's actually still charging. USB, and that's the main switch for the entire board. We provided a completely independent 12-volt supply for all the rally equipment, including the lamps, and that is all fused up here. There are 3 relays. These should have been tucked out of the way, out of sight really. They don't need to be accessible, so I could have done that better. The 3 relays are the main relay for the ultimate power distribution, and then there's 2 for the auxiliary lamps. Because these are pier lamps and therefore work on a dipped beam as well as a main beam, H4 bulbs, means that you effectively need 2 relays. One as a main source relay to make sure that auxiliary lamps don't come on unless the headlights are on, and then the second to switch between dipped and main circuit. So that's 3 relays there. We have the map light. We have here the plot light. So this is really good lighting. We actually make it shorter, but we'll see, we can always shorten it later. This is sometimes too bright. Firstly, for the navigator to plot on his maps, gives a really good broad light. And secondly, by placing it here, it means that on the night sections, the navigator can switch the light on and give a really good base for the marshal to fill out the time card. Bright light, solid on the open door, and that makes for a faster time control. Okay, that's that and that. The trip meter here is an International 3 with a choice of GPS input, which is scalable, which is nice, an improvement over what the Monet provides, because the Monet is just raw GPS you can't actually scale it to the organizer's mile. Or alternatively the sensor, which is on the rear left hand wheel. So you've got a choice of sensors there. And what else? Then just the pen holders here. And this whole unit snaps out using these two Zeus fasteners, there and there. Off it comes, and there's one plug just behind here. So in 10 seconds you can take the whole of this unit out to be able to make modifications or do any other changes you want to make to it. Okay, that's everything here. Let's look in the boot. Okay, in the boot we have the spill kit and the tarpaulin underneath, and some basic tools here, all strapped down with a ratchet strap. When Ludo gets here, we'll also put in another ratchet strap to hold down his carry-on luggage. This is Ian Rix's post to secure two spares. If you go down to one spare, you can just take the upper bit of the post out. So that's quite nice and adaptable. But there we go, that's that. We have another illumination here, which when the side lights are on, gives you boot lighting. So that's quite a nice little natty thing there. And as for the tailgate, we had a nightmare with this. The wretched body, there are so many complaints I have about the people who sold this car. So when they put the tailgate back on, firstly, they didn't bother putting this bolt in, or this bolt here in. There were only 3 bolts where 6 were required. The loom, they just stuffed in and crammed it into here and then just let it be. So we had to try and get all that loom back out before wiring it back up to the wiper and the washer. The washer, they just sort of burnt it all up and left it stuffed down the side here. The rear screen, they hadn't even put any connections on it at all. Really, if you're selling a car that is supposed to be immaculate, then you kind of would like the bodywork people to actually do a halfway decent job of reinstating the tailgate. I am disgusted. That really is awful. Knowingly to leave it like that. Enough of that. Let's progress. Okay, so the Pia lamp installation, as I mentioned before, Pia lamps, absolutely gorgeous. I'm just so impressed by these units. They're using H4 lamps so that they work as a dipped beam as well as a main beam, which really helps. It's surprising how dim these headlights are. And the installation I've done here is basically 2 bolts securing the entire bar here, and remove the 2 stay bars, and the whole thing just moves off. The reason that is red and that isn't is so that when it goes back in again, you can put the red bar on the port hand side or the left hand side, and you know that your beam is pretty much set up exactly as it was last time you were out rallying. So that gives you repeatability on the beam height. Okay, so remembering before opening the bonnet to take the 2 bonnets, the stays off. Hopefully next time it comes in we'll put in bonnet clips, but in the meantime we've got this arrangement here to flip the bonnet. And what have we done down here? Well, not a great deal. The cam belt's been changed, so we're happy with that. Full service obviously, new ignition set. This phase 1 washer pump fed both front and rear washers and was awful. So what we've now gone to is using this reservoir just for the rear wash and using 2 aftermarket pumps to get us enough pressure. And then I've jury rigged, because this was very late last night, a Volvo pump for the front washer, and that gives you a really good jet to the front screen. So now we've gone from really pathetic, awful washers to top grade Volvo quality screen washers. So that's all good. Was there anything else down here that we did? I don't think that. Oh yes, of course, the rad fan let go and died. So an excellent supply of used parts. Ian up in Lowestoft supplied me with a diesel twin fan kit. So now we've got working rad fans again. At the moment I've just got it wired up here so that one can switch between the fans if one dies by unplugging and plugging in. But when it comes back, we'll be able to rig that as a switchable rather than having to unplug it between the fans. Anything else down here? Obviously the fuel filter was changed when we were doing the servicing. Idle's a touch high, so I've just got to check that the vacuum advance on the Dizzy hasn't let go and needs blanking. But that's it. That's Ludo's car, ready to go. The Land's End to John O'Groats Rally. It starts on Friday, or is it Saturday morning? One or the other. So this weekend. It's the event that Amy won last year in an MG. It's tough on the navigators. You've got to have a reliable car, because otherwise you'll just be spending miserable hours in dreadful conditions trying to keep it running. Yeah, tough outing for this. Then it comes back to us, and then Ludo's out on the winter trial. Oh, we hadn't mentioned wheels, have we? So those lovely 205 GTI alloys have gone, and we've put on the same offset steels, 14-inch rims, and we're using the same profile and width of tyre, so it's still a 185 tyre, but a winter tyre. For the winter trial, I have to say, I think we should go down to 165 70 R14s if there is significant chance of snow. So we'll have to look at that and discuss that before the winter trial. But my guessing is we'll be going down 2 sizes on the tread width for the winter trial. There we go, ready to hand over. Thank you.